All right, so Olivier, I thought that we could begin perhaps with a short self-introduction because some people in the United States are ignorant and don't know of you, though they should. Everyone should know about you.
Yeah, of course, of
So,
course.
so please to say a few words about yourself.
Okay, so I'll try to make it short. I've been in the field of self-help and spirituality for the past 40 years. It started exactly 40 years ago when I came to the US as a foreign exchange student, and I read my first self-help books, and I've been interested in that ever since. Um, I've written 20 books to this day, with translations in about 15 languages. I've translated about 100 books from English to French, including two of your books, Coyote Wisdom and Narrative Medicine, which I was very happy to be able to share with the French public. And very early in my life, I realized that books were one thing, but people were something else. So when I liked a book, I wanted to meet the author. And I think the first author I ever met was Robert Monroe, who had written the famous book about out-of-body experiences. And so I was just 23 or 22 when I went down to North Carolina to meet Robert Monroe and do a training with him with his hemisync process, synchronizing the two hemispheres of the brain. And I've been doing that many times, which allowed me to encounter some quite astonishing people. For instance, in 1998, I was able to meet Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of Nonviolent Communication. I had published his book in French, and I did a one-week training with him because I wanted to see the man behind the method, and I really enjoyed that. And the same year, 98, was the year I discovered the Four Agreements through a friend, Maud Sejournant, who lives in Santa Fe in New Mexico. And I read that book and I translated it and published it in French. And then I thought, wow, this is a man I would really like to meet, because I could feel that there was some spirit flowing through the book. And the next year, in 1999, somebody is asking, oui, ça sera tout le temps en anglais. La séance va être en anglais.
Bon, ben,
Désolé.
alors je comprends pas. Alors je quitte.
So the next year in 1999, I had the opportunity to go to Mexico with Don Miguel Ruiz and a group of French-speaking people. And it's during that trip, a little more than 20 years ago, that Don Miguel had me go through a forgiveness experience, which lasted maybe only like 30 or 45 minutes, but which really changed my life. There was before that experience and after that experience. I was raised a Catholic, so forgiveness is part of Christianity. But with Don Miguel, I discovered a totally different approach to forgiveness. And it took me 10 years to write about this experience. And I wrote it first in English. The book is called The Gift of Forgiveness and was published in English first by Finhorn Press. And then a year after, I translated my own book in French and also published in French. It now exists in 8 different languages. And amazingly, as soon as the book was out, people started asking me if I was willing to do workshops around that issue, which wasn't part of my plans, but I did. And rapidly, I realized that
Olivier, on t'entend plus.
when you shut down everyone, you shut me too. So you need to put me back on.
I did. And so I just ask everyone to please mute themselves because I can't selectively
No, that's right.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, you've done it, so I should be the only one to have the mic on.
Okay.
So, as I said, soon the book was out. People started asking me to give workshops, which I wasn't doing before that. And rapidly, I realized that there was a huge need for forgiveness, because forgiveness for most of us is linked to religion. So if you don't attend a specific religion, then maybe forgiveness seems something that's not for you. And the process that Don Miguel had me go through and the way I've adapted it to be experienced in a group doesn't require having to have specific beliefs, be they Christian or Muslim or Jew or Buddhist or whatever. So in a very short time, this adventure grew bigger and bigger. I found myself giving workshops almost every month. And a couple years later, in 2012, I decided I couldn't be alone doing that because there was more demand that I could satisfy. So I started training people to give circles of forgiveness, which was like a compact version of what I did in 2 days, but just in 2 hours. And over the past 7 years, I've trained about 600 people to lead circles of forgiveness in the world. And there exists to this day about 230 of them that are active in about 15 countries. So it has been quite a unique adventure because I hadn't realized how badly we are in need of ways to heal our hearts, because most of us have been wounded in our hearts, either one big time at some point in our lives, or several times, like when we're being bullied or when we're confronted to the same humiliation day after day after day, and so on. And so most of us reach adulthood with the heart that is broken, that is not sane in many ways. And I like to say that the heart is between the head and the hand. So if my heart is not okay, then my thinking will be disturbed too. I'll keep repeating the same stories in my head all the time. And everything I'll be doing, all my projects, even the way I cook food, I mean, everything I'll be doing will also be affected by the state in which my heart is, which means that if I can heal my heart, then I will have a different kind of thinking spontaneously. And I will put a different energy in everything I'll be doing in my life. And for that reason, I've spent the 10 last years working with forgiveness and sharing tools to help people reach forgiveness. Not only my tool, but others as well. Because if people work with radical forgiveness from Colin Tipping, or if they work with the 9 steps to forgiveness from Dr. Fred Luskin in California, or if they work with Dr. Lasko's Hollow Energetic, for me, anything is fine as long as it allows people to find a way and to reach that healing of the heart.
And I think one of the most amazing experiences I had was to do the circle with you when we were together at a workshop south of Paris.
Mm.
And you told everyone to please forgive the devil because we've probably blamed him for so many things that he didn't do. Ask the devil for forgiveness because we've maligned him excessively, and that was quite an experience. And it was
Yes, indeed. That's the second step of the process. Over the years, we've slightly changed a few things, because talking about the devil for people with no religious or spiritual beliefs may sort of block them. So I realized that whether we believe or not in the devil, we do demonize a lot of people. We turn them into devils. So the second step now, we ask people to ask forgiveness from all their scapegoats, meaning all the groups, all the people that we demonize, that we turn into evil. And it's always a very powerful experience to realize that whatever people have been doing, I mean, they're responsible for what they do and for what they say, but I am responsible for what I feel. and I can release my heart from the anger and the resentments, and I can be free. And if needed, I can also go to court and ask for justice, but I'll do that with a heart that is at peace.
And I think it would be really helpful for our audience if you could say more about the indigenous origins of this practice, to talk more about Don Miguel Ruiz and the Toltec philosophy and your experience with him in learning this process, and then the way that he demanded, really, as I read your book, which I'm holding in my hand. I will put it
Yes,
up.
you have the French version.
I
Wonderful.
do. I read the French version. Yes, indeed. And but to say more about that so that our indigenous audience can connect with this process.
Yes, of course. Well, Don Miguel was born in Mexico. He was the 13th child of the family, and he was raised both in a Christian environment, but also with this Toltec lineage, which he had from his mother and from his grandfather, and then it goes way, way, way back in history. And so he was raised with both this culture, and his mom, which was a famous healer, first in Mexico, then in California, where she lived for a very long time. She knew right away that he would be the one to take that Toltec teaching and to spread it. But when he turned 20, he said, I'm not interested in all those Toltec stuff. I want to become a doctor. So he went to medical faculty. He became a neurosurgeon, and he worked as a neurosurgeon until he was about 35, when he had a very bad car accident and had I don't know if it was an out-of-body experience or if it was a near-death experience, but anyway, he found himself outside of his body and had such a powerful experience that when he got back, when he decided to quit medicine and to turn to these Toltec teachings, which he had received from his mother and his grandfather. And the great, great gift of Don Miguel was that he was able to take all of those indigenous teachings from the Toltec tradition and to realize that part of it were not adapted to this particular time and this particular culture, since he moved to New Mexico, and he's been living in the United States now for the past 25 years or more. So he sort of took the spirit of those teachings, but he removed some superstitions, some power stuff, some things which would probably have made these teachings a lot more difficult for the whole world to adopt. And when he created the 4 agreements, he found it's like if he had been using a still and if he had distilled the teaching and he gave the essential oil, the quintessence of the Toltec teaching in such a simple and accessible manner that the book became a world bestseller. It's been translated in 46 languages, and it's the only book, to my knowledge, that every single year for the past 22 years, more than the previous year. Which means that at first it was read by people that were interested in spirituality, in self-help, in personal development, but not today. Today it's being read in the U.S. Army. It's being used in the business world. It's being used in schools and everywhere. It's like it's spreading and touching people that have no particular interest in spiritual things at first. So he made something which I find very relevant to these particular times. I see that with the Tibetan teachings, with the Sufi, with others. There have been masters over the past decades who've been able to take the spirits of their tradition and be able to express it in a way that has made it accessible to a much wider range of people without betraying, of course, the fundamental spirit of this teaching. And it's interesting because Don Miguel came to France for the first time in 2012, I was his interpreter for all his lecture in Switzerland and France. And when he was in Paris, he said something very interesting, because people were asking him about the Toltec philosophy and Toltec people. And he said, you know, it's not important to get fixed upon an old tradition that was in that part of the world. He said, to me today, being a Toltec means being an artist. He said, here I am in Paris, and Paris to me is a Toltec city because I see art everywhere. At every corner of the streets, there is art. A Toltec is somebody who is trying to make a masterpiece of work out of his life. So any of us, we are all artists, and if we strive at becoming artists and at turning our lives into something beautiful, then we are Toltec in that meaning. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting, because he's opening up. I mean, he has these roots down in this lineage that goes back centuries, but he's opening up to give the fruits, the flower of his teaching, in the same way that the Tibetans since 1959 have been offering the essence of Buddhism, of Tibetan Buddhism in the whole world.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? And I think that it speaks to something that is a continual theme in this course, which is two-eyed seeing, that there, which is also really explanatory pluralism, that there's many ways to see the world, and they don't have to make sense to each other. And it seems like Don Miguel has found a way to translate Toltec ideas into a universal language
Yes.
that's really helpful to people, to all people. And I certainly found my participation, at least I've participated in your circles at least twice, once in France and once in Brattleboro, Vermont. And it is a powerful process. And so maybe now you could describe the process
Yes.
as it exists today, because I
Mm-hmm.
know it from the last time we were together, I think was in Brattleboro, Vermont, a
That's
few
right.
years back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
So the process as it is, I think you have somebody in the waiting room.
oh, yes.
The the process is really based on that first experience that Don Miguel had me go through in September 1999. Um, and it's interesting because it's very simple, but it's amazingly powerful. And that's one reason I think why circles of forgiveness have been spreading so far. Um, I'll share it the way it happened to me, and I'll show the slight differences with the way that it's being shared. When I was in Teotihuacan, Mexico, Don Miguel asked me at some point to come to him, and then he asked me to without any explanation, just out of the blue, which was quite a surprise for me. He said, "I want you to kneel down in front of that lady, it's one of the participants close to me, and just ask her forgiveness." And he doesn't tell me why. I start wondering, did I do something wrong? Did it perceive some sort of karmic connection or whatever? But luckily, I was following my own spiritual path for 15 years, and I knew that sometimes you just have to do things, and you understand after you've done it. Trying to figure out things intellectually won't work. So I just kneeled down in front of that lady. Her name was Veronique, and I looked at her in the eyes for a while, and I said, "Well, please forgive me because," and there I tried to find a reason. And he said, no, don't try to find a reason. Just ask forgiveness from her and then move on to the next person and then to the next and then to the whole group. And there I find myself, on my knees and having to ask forgiveness from about 20 people. And I don't know why. But again, I say, okay, let's do it. And so I move on to the next person and I look at that person deeply in the eyes and I say, please forgive me. And I move on. And the more I do it, the more something starts happening, both in me and in the other people facing me, where I see all sorts of emotions coming out, tears and so on. And at some point, I'm facing a woman there, and while I look at her and I say, please forgive me, suddenly I'm not seeing that woman, which I've known only for 48 hours. I'm seeing my mother. It's like through that participant in a transpersonal way, I'm actually asking forgiveness from my mother, who is 6,000 kilometers away from there. And that's quite a surprise. I've never experienced that, you know, seeing a different face on the face of somebody physically standing in front of yourself. And I move on, and then a bit later, there's that man there. And while I look at him, the same thing happens again. I see another face. I see the face of a former colleague I had with whom the relationship was very difficult. And so through that participant, I'm actually asking for forgiveness from that other man. And there suddenly I get it. This whole process is not personal. I mean, these 20 people, we've been together for what, 48 hours? We've got no issues, no personal problems. But through them, I can ask forgiveness from anybody on this planet, alive or even dead, that I have issues with. It is totally transpersonal. It's like 20 windows that are offered to me, 20 living icons through which I can experience a process. And it is so powerful that by the time I finish the group, you know, I feel like I've been asking for forgiveness from all of humanity, all of mankind, for all those judgments I feel allowed to have when I'm reading the papers, when I'm seeing the news on TV. And so there's a huge letting go, a huge release inside of me. And that's just the first step of the process. Then Miguel asks me to come over. So I stand back up, and he says, now, that was the second step you mentioned. He did, in fact, ask me to ask forgiveness from the devil. And again, today, worldwide, in circles of forgiveness, we think it's simpler to ask people just to ask forgiveness from their scapegoats. You know, we tend to look at traitors or pharmaceutical laboratories or at terrorists or pedophiles or whatever, and we demonize those people, we turn them into evil. And Miguel says, ask forgiveness from your scapegoats, ask forgiveness from the devil, because you are using them to keep your heart shut. Now that's an amazing statement, because when he tells me that, I realize that he's giving me back my power. He's giving me back my freedom. Okay, there are lots of people doing bad things in the world, but I'm not a machine. You know, it's not because people are doing bad things that I have to hate, that I have to be angry, that I have to be sad. I have the possibility of healing my heart and of seeing what people are doing and taking the right steps and do the necessary things without cultivating devastating feelings in my heart. So I do what he says. I close my eyes for a while and I deeply ask for forgiveness from all the people, from all the groups that I've been demonizing over the years. And again, I feel a second release, a second deep letting go happening inside. Third step, again, in his own way, Miguel says to me, now ask forgiveness from today in circles of forgiveness, since they were created in France. It's a very different cultural context than the United States. And talking about God may block a lot of people. So now we say, please ask forgiveness from what is greater than you. It may be God for some people. It may be life. It may be the earth. It may be Gaia. It may be the universe. Ask forgiveness from whatever is greater than you. And Miguel said something interesting. He said, even what is most sacred, we can use that to keep our hearts shut. And when he said that, I had immediately an example in mind. You know, people that say, where was God in Nazi concentration camps? Where is God when a woman is being raped, when a child is the victim of a pedophile? And when we ask questions like that, we don't realize that we are using what is most sacred, what is so infinitely bigger than we are as a reason to keep our hearts shut. And so that was quite something for me to realize. And so again, I closed my eyes, and from the bottom of my heart, I asked forgiveness from God. I asked forgiveness from all that is so much bigger than I am, for my judgments, for the way I would block myself, you know. And that was a third release inside. And the fourth and final step, and Miguel was so kind as to let me know that that would be the most difficult one. I said, now please ask forgiveness from yourself. And why do I say it's the most difficult? Well, because as far as I've seen over the past 10 years, most of us manage sometimes to forgive others for what they've done, but to forgive myself. I mean, we are so harsh on ourselves. We judge ourselves, we hate ourselves, we keep criticizing ourselves all the time. Most people have a very poor, very bad relationship with themselves. So being able to ask forgiveness from oneself to make peace with oneself, it's the biggest thing ever. And so again, I closed my eyes for a while. And I really asked forgiveness from myself. And I could see, you know, all the Olivers I had been as a little child, as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult. And it's like, if, you know, there's a process in shamanism that is called soul retrieval. You know, with the idea that sometimes when you have a terrible experience, part of your soul leaves you. And while leaving you, it will take the energy and the memory. And so we have parts of ourselves here and there that we lost over the years. And so we are not whole. And some shamans are able to pick up and get back these pieces of ourselves and put them back inside. Sandra Ingerman wrote a fantastic book about soul retrieval, which I translated in French. Well, actually, in this fourth step of the process, asking forgiveness from oneself, it's like if we are getting back parts of ourselves that we have judged, that we have wanted to cut ourselves away from these parts. And it's like if we make peace with everything we have been. And it was for me like a peak experience at that moment. It's like all the defenses I had built for so many years around my heart were finally collapsing. And it was like a second birth, like a rebirth that I was experiencing at that time. It was very powerful. And two things happened at the end of the process. First, Don Miguel had the whole group do a huge collective hug around me, which was my first experience of a collective hug. But it's good to have something physical bringing you back in the body after such a powerful inner experience. And second, he said something extremely important, although I realized that only a month later. He said, you know, I've been helping you through going through that process, but you can do it anytime by yourself. Now that's very powerful, because if he hadn't told me that, I might have believed that to experience that, I needed to have Don Miguel Ruiz or some other highly spirited person with me, or I needed a group, or worse, I needed the pyramids of Teotihuacan, and there are no pyramids in France. But he just said, you can do that again whenever you want. And that's exactly what I discovered some months later when I saw I was starting to judge again. I was going in the same track as before. And I remembered those words and I said, okay, let's try that. Can I do this process all by myself, all alone? And I did. And I realized that the same liberation was happening. I was releasing my heart from anything that was trying to block it. And that was the start for me of this journey I've been on for the past 20 years. And that's what led me finally one day to write the book and then the workshops and so on. But the whole experience must have lasted, what, like 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, not more. But in spite of having been raised in a religious tradition where forgiveness has a major role to play, I had never experienced something as powerful and as liberating as those 4 steps.
Indeed. And I know that people have asked you about this, and I know you will have an amazing answer. And so here in Maine, where I practice, um, many people on the reservations and urban Indians have experienced terrible trauma. So sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, you know, neglect, all manner of abuse, and institutional abuse as um, it's not discussed as widely, but the police violence toward indigenous people is every much as great as the police violence toward Black people in this country, in the United States. And you know, just like the Juneteenth massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of the Black Wall Street, we have, you know, so many massacres that happened. The Dakota 36 Dakota men who were hung for no good reason mostly, and the massacre of Wounded Knee, et cetera, et cetera. So people struggle with this question of how do you forgive in the context of both historical and intergenerational trauma and personal lived trauma. And and I I know that Don Miguel thought about this deeply, and I know that you have too. And and so if you could speak to that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, of course. Well, the first thing is that in the 4 steps process I just described, Don Miguel never asked me to forgive. 4 times he asked me to ask for forgiveness, which means it's exactly 180 degrees from everything we are trying to do. He did not tell me, forgive those people here, forgive the devil, forgive God, forgive yourself. He put me in a position where I had to ask for forgiveness 4 times. Now, that is very surprising because most of us, if not all of us, when we've been wounded, when we've suffered violence and trauma, we are expecting others to ask forgiveness. And sometimes we wait, and we can wait a whole life and it never happens. And we remain wounded. And one reason I've been calling forgiveness healing the wounds of the heart is because it allows people a very simple comparison with how we go about healing the wounds of the body. If somebody attacks me in the streets with a knife and I'm wounded on the arm, and then he runs away, what do? Do I wait for that person to come back and have everything to make stitches? And is that the person who is going to heal me? If I wait for that person to heal me, I may wait for my whole life. If it's a light wound, maybe I can just heal it myself. If it's a deeper wound, I'll go to the hospital, I'll go see a nurse, a doctor, somebody, I'll get help, and I'll be able to get that wound healed. Well, it's the same thing with the wounds of the heart. Forgiveness is actually something we do for ourselves. This is not what I've been taught when I was at church, when I was a kid. I thought that forgiveness was a gift I was making to the other person, except sometimes I'll say, I'll never forgive you. I'll never give you that gift. But when I'm saying that, what I'm truly saying is that I'll stay wounded. I'll keep hurting. But when I do that, who's suffering? The other person or me? So the whole process that Miguel taught me is that forgiveness is something I do first and foremost for me, because I want to love again. I want to laugh again. I want to have a life. And once I have restored the health and the integrity to my heart, as I can restore the health and the integrity to my skin, my bones, my muscles, then I decide what is right to do, what is just to do. So the amazing thing is that this reversal way of approaching forgiveness gives me the freedom that I was unable to find when I was trying to forgive myself.
Mm.
And the interesting thing is that, you know, of all the things I've experienced in the last 40 years in personal health and in spirituality, nothing has brought me as much freedom and has changed my life as deeply as forgiveness. Really, I mean, it's not advertising; it's the truth. And so I lost my track. Uh, what I'm trying to say is that I've had people, you know, forgiveness is so important that I didn't want to just stick to one approach. So I organized for 4 years in France the Days of Forgiveness. I invited every year 20 renowned international speakers on forgiveness. I had Colin Tipping. I had Dr. Fred Luskin. I had Jean-Paul Samputu, survivor of the Rwanda genocide. I had Jean Fourie in South Africa, whose daughter was shot in a massacre in Johannesburg. I had people from all walks of life, all countries, all religion, who all went through some terrible ordeals. And all of them found a way to forgiveness that changed their life because it made them free. And once they were free inside, they could decide what was right to do. Should they sue the person? Should they reconcile with that person? I mean, Jean Fourie ended up, you know, finding the man responsible for ordering this massacre of which her daughter died. And the two of them have been touring the whole world, giving lectures on peace, forgiveness, reconciliation, because she just changed the whole story from the point where she had reached forgiveness. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's you do like this and it's done. What I'm saying is that there's a path to that peace of the heart, and that once it's there, it opens ways of changing not only one's life but other people's life. That is astonishing. I've read, I mean, all the shelf, the upper shelf here is just all the books on forgiveness I've been reading in French and in English. I've seen so many videos, documentaries, films. I'm very interested in restorative justice also, which is something amazing that is developing now. And I see such a huge way of changing our relationships to ourselves, to our past, to our family, to even to the people who've done very, very terrible things to ourselves. So that's one reason. I had never, you know, it wasn't part of my career plan to become Mr. Forgiveness in France. It just happened to me. But I've seen over the past 10 years hundreds, if not thousands, of people whose lives have been deeply, amazingly changed. Not only here, but even physical illness they had, social issues, family problems. So every case is unique. Every problem is unique. What I'm sure is that anybody who finds a way, who finds the appropriate tool, method to reach that peace of the heart, whatever the trauma, whatever the situation they've been through, they'll have the opportunity to think about it, to solve it, to go about finding justice, to go about defending their rights with something inside that is aligned, that is peaceful, that is powerful, like Mandela did in South Africa, like Gandhi did in India, like others of which we don't know the names, but who've done pretty much as amazing things in other situations.
It seems like what this process does is it frees people from the sense of being a continual victim,
That's right.
and it sets them on a course of being able to practice um, practice self-compassion, compassion for others, but also pursue social justice, to
Yes.
pursue the righting of wrongs as well, which seems like a very powerful thing to do.
And you know, one of the key elements of this particular way of reaching forgiveness is that it requires humility. And I think there's no, for me, humility is like a founding quality, founding virtue for any spiritual path. Humility means becoming aware that there is something bigger than us. Call it nature, call it God, call it the great everything. And once we open up to that, once we go down from our ivory tower, where I'm so sure that I'm right, you're wrong, I'm the victim, you're the perpetrator. Once I go out of that, amazing options open up. And you know, today, I'll say something which will sound very, very strange. I don't believe we can forgive, but I believe we can create an opening so that forgiveness may flow through us. And this is totally different. If I say, I forgive you, I mean, who am I to forgive? For Christians, did Jesus on the cross say, I forgive you because you don't know what you're doing? No, he said, Father, forgive them. And I find that amazingly interesting. I mean, even he did not forgive. He let something greater than him forgive. So when we ask for forgiveness, we create an opening in the shell of our ego, and the light can come in. The water of forgiveness can flow through us. And that's the amazing power of that reversal. We finally reconnect to the divine, we reconnect to life, we reconnect to love, and the healing happens. But we're not the ones doing it. We're just the ones who are creating the condition for that to go and to flow through us. You see the difference?
Yes, and it's very indigenous. You know, there's humility, which is a key virtue of most indigenous people. And there's this notion of making oneself a hollow bone for the medicine to flow through,
Yeah.
of making oneself a vessel for the forgiveness to enter and flow and be distributed, rather than being the agent of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me that so many of the healers that I know in North America would never say that they were a healer. They would say, I'm a hollow bone through which the medicine flows. My job is to keep a safe space alive for the medicine to exist and to flow when needed. And and the last thing that I think I wanted to say about the process is that the way you do it in circles is also quite indigenous, because it eliminates hierarchy,
Yes.
that it makes everyone equal,
Yes.
because it's so different from someone standing up in front of everyone and saying, do this. It's that notion of we're all equal moving around a circle.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's so it seems like, and I wanted you to be a part of this course, because it seems like this is sort of a pan-cultural, indigenous derived process that anyone can use, including
Exactly.
indigenous people.
Yeah. Exactly. Because whatever philosophy, whatever culture, whatever religion people may have, it I mean, it doesn't require you to believe you in this or that. It just requires you to do it, and it can be done whatever our background. And exactly as you said, I mean, I've called that circles of forgiveness, but we could have called them circles of humanity, circles of humility, or circles of love, because what happens is that since we're all equal, we're all standing in front of each other, then you realize you're just that far from touching the other people's divinity, humanity, quintessence. And I have so many people telling me, you know, it's like it's the first time in my life that I've discovered what is unconditional love. I've discovered the beauty of mankind, the beauty of my fellow humans, with a process that lasts just 2 hours, you know. And an old man, an 80-year-old man, came to me once, and he was, when it was all over, he was ready to leave the room, And there he stopped with the hand on the handle of the door. And he turned to me and he just said this. He said, I thought it was very complicated and very far, but it's very easy and it's very close. And I thought it was a wonderful way of just summarizing. I mean, we think we have to go, into a process that's going to take years of pain and suffering for us to reach that freedom of the heart, that peace of the heart. We think it's far. We think it's very complicated. And we realize that actually it's just one step away from us. And that given the appropriate context and the appropriate tool, and for me, it's a sacred ritual. I don't present it that way because I want it to be open to anyone, but I know, what I do inside before, during, and after the process. And that's how I train others to lead it. It's sacred, it's simple, it's powerful, it's a circle. And in the center of that circle, we connect with spirits. And then we just create the condition for spirits to do that healing through all the participants.
Right, and that's explains my wish to bring this into the indigenous communities in Maine, because I think they need it. They, this connection with spirit, in many ways, it's decolonizing work.
Mm-hmm.
To bring back that connection with spirit that heals us all in a circle process.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to the end because my audience won't listen for more than an hour. So welcome to the United States, where the
I do
attention
the same.
span.
I do 1 hour Zooms in France too, so it's a good timing.
Yeah. So let me invite you to any closing words that you want to share with indigenous Northeastern America.
Well, I think that, I'm pretty much convinced that the healing of the wounds of the heart is one of the major things we have to do on this planet today. When I say this in lectures, people say, hey, no, the most important thing is ecology, the environment, the climate. And I say, right, but I think the two are connected. Because I think that once we start healing our hearts, then something changes deeply, which is going to change also the outside, our way of looking at trees, at plants, at animals, at the weather, the sun, and everything. But honestly, I haven't seen anything as powerful as healing the heart to change not only one's own life, but all of our relationships, to the family, to the work, to the states, to nature, and to all the rest. I think it's really the biggest, the most powerful way we have to make a difference in our lives and in the lives of all those around us. And although I started on that path, working backwards, because I had not intended to write the book, I had not intended to do workshops and so on, but life kept pushing me there. Now I know why, and I'm glad to share that, and I feel like training more and more people, just giving out the tools and how to implement it in a way that makes people totally autonomous, independent, how to empower people to do that wherever they are, because it's much needed today.
Great. Well, I really appreciate taking up an hour of your time on a beautiful Sunday. Hopefully it's beautiful where you are.
Yes, it is, and I hope you'll be coming here, or others will have the opportunity to come
Indeed,
here, and we'll be sharing a circle or other things together.
Indeed, and we're counting on France being open in September. So,
yes, I certainly hope so. Yes.
Me too, because I've got tickets. So.
Yeah, and I keep talking about your work. I mean, I was talking about your work this very morning to somebody, and I said you should go and follow Louis' next retreat in France. And so, yeah.
Yeah,
You
we'll
can
have a good
make it
time.
with Barbara.
Yes. All right, well, I will send you a copy of the recording, and also I'll let you know so that you can let your list know the details of the class and if they want to attend anything. So with that, I'll say thank you so much.
Thank
And
you for giving me that opportunity. I really appreciate it.
great.